Can everybody see that okay?
Works.
Good.
Perfect. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Lovely. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, look, everyone, so what you can see here, this is our plan for what we intend to cover during this session. As I say, we've run this session 3 times already this week, and we have brought it into time, I think on every occasion, perhaps running over by a couple of minutes. So we are going to pack quite a lot in, so we're going to go at quite a pace. But as I say, if there's anything you don't understand, please do stop us as we go along. Okay, Lisa, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about the roadmap out of lockdown, which I'm sure you've all heard about. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, announced that the roadmap that we're going to be following back in towards the end of February. I think it's something like the 22nd of February it was first announced. And what the roadmap does is it sets out a series of dates when things might happen, according to the government, as we ease out of lockdown and back to what we hope will be a normal life. I think what's been very clear throughout is the government have been absolutely specific about the fact that if these conditions that you see on screen in front of you aren't met, then they may well pause the lockdown, pause the emergence from lockdown, or they may even throw it into reverse. So if you heard Boris talking Monday of this week, when he announced that we would be moving to step 2 on the 12th of April, he was very, very clear, and they spent quite a lot of time going through some slides that show that these conditions continue to be met. But I think it's very clear that the government has got one eye on what's happening in sort of the rest of Europe, where obviously they are, they haven't progressed as far with their vaccine programs, and they are now seeing a sort of a third wave. And obviously we in this country, although our vaccine program has progressed incredibly well, and the NHS currently isn't under threat of being sort of overwhelmed, we do have to have one eye on sort of things like new variants and that. So that's sort of just the what the roadmap is sort of predicated upon. And Lisa's now going to talk about the different steps in that roadmap, so you understand sort of what you can anticipate.
Okay, so we're going to start by looking back a little bit at the first couple of steps that we've already taken in this point. So up until now, community facilities could only open, as we know, for exempt activities, and that included blood donor sessions, food banks, support groups. And now, of course, we know that that the law has added to that list of exempt activities the use of polling stations. So your village halls can all open up to be used as polling stations in the coming weeks. So at the beginning of March, we saw the fact that our schools returned, thankfully, and so our community facilities could be used for school purposes. So if it was something that you already had in place previously, where schools have used your facilities, that could take place again. So moving on to the 29th of March, everything expanded a little bit further, thankfully. We're all pleased to see the list of outdoor activities that can now take place. We've mentioned on this slide the rule of 6, and we're going to cover the rule of 6 a little bit later on because it has got slightly more complicated. Government have kind of tweaked that rule, so we'll explain that a little bit later. The thing I really wanted to pick up on with this slide is the fact that if you do have an outdoor space attached to your hall, it's a really great way of introducing people back to your facility and making people aware that, that they can use your outdoor space, and it'll only be a few more weeks before they can have their activities and classes indoors. So it's worth, if you have that space, it's worth making the best possible use of it at this time. One of the points that I wanted to raise here being the fact that if you are preparing to open, as from now, you can show prospective hirers around your hall. You can do that in a voluntary capacity. It falls into that category of voluntary work. So you can show people round, but you just must be aware of the COVID regulations in terms of social distancing, obviously 2 metre spacing, and face covers must be worn throughout that. Make sure that your building is as COVID secure as possible, with hand sanitizers available but you can show people around. So it's quite an important step when you've got maybe new hirers coming along who want to see what the building's like, and it will give you that opportunity to do that. I've been asked quite a few times if the toilet facilities of the building could be open if people are making use of the outdoor space. And as it says on this slide, that your toilets are not public toilets, so it's not something that you're obliged to do or you have to do. But if it's something that you wanted to consider doing, then you perfectly, you can open your building for that purpose. Obviously, you would keep the rest of your building closed to the public, but they could make you could make your toilets accessible for any activity, making it very clear with the hirer that it's not there for the purposes of the general public. So you would have to make sure that the building is locked. And I would suggest that you have you work on a sort of a one in, one out basis to avoid queues forming, making sure your COVID protocols are in place with your hand sanitizer at the entrance and exit points, plenty of hot water and soap available, and making people aware that they must wear their face masks while they're entering the building. And as I've said, that it isn't open to the general public to use at that time. It is specifically for the use of that group exclusively. Okay, so the 12th of April, this is really the first point at which we'll start to see a bit more activity inside our buildings. Unfortunately, at this stage, a lot of the groups that are your regular classes won't be able to take place. So no art classes, clubs, WI, craft groups, those types of groups are still not permitted until the 17th of May. It is worth checking with the hirer. If you get a prospective hirer coming along, it's worth checking with them to make sure that if they have a governing body or an umbrella group, and this applies to this step 2 and step 3. So if they have a governing body, quite often these groups are providing COVID secure regulations and protocols to their tutors and leaders. So it is worth asking, what protocols do you have set down? When you're thinking about organisations such as the Brownies and Scouts, dance teachers, they will have limits that they're advised to stick to and protocols that they should have in place when conducting their classes. So do talk to them about, what is your governing body advising you to do in these circumstances. A little example is I've been told that the Brownies have been advised to stick to groups of no more than 15 at the moment. So if you've got a Brownie pack, which is a particularly large pack, what they might be asking for is that they could have multiple bookings, so one booking after another, so that they can accommodate all of their Brownies on one evening. So, try and be flexible and work with them to make sure that they can be as inclusive as possible with their young people. In the coming weeks, you may also find that you're getting an increase of inquiries around wakes and weddings. As it says on this slide here, restaurants and hotels aren't open at this stage. And so people might be coming to you where they've got a small family group where they want to hire the space for those reasons. So just be aware of that. There has been new guidance around wedding receptions. This only came out on the 25th of February, and wedding receptions for up to 15 people are permitted, but it's permitted as an outdoor reception with a sit-down meal. And obviously that event would have to be COVID secure at all stages, and clearly there would be no dancing allowed at this time. So the thing they're saying about the marquees is you can have marquees put up, but it must be a two-sided marquee only. And obviously that is to allow for plenty of ventilation to flow through to keep people as safe as possible. It's been confirmed that children's parties with a maximum of 15 adults can be held indoors at this stage. If you've got a children's entertainer, obviously that would be counted as one of the permitted adults within that head count. And again, it goes without saying that your building's got to be COVID secure, and they must be applying the the social distancing rules while they're hiring your facility for an event like that. A very quick point on, we've got there about children, parent and toddler groups. Parent and toddler groups, it's a maximum of 15 people allowed to attend. So that's a head count on the adults and not on the children. And I'll give you a kind of example. A mother might come along and she's got a 2-year-old and a babe in arms, but that will only count as one. There was a question around this, did arise actually overnight about does that 15 count include the volunteers and the leaders of those groups, and it doesn't. So if you've got leaders and volunteers, the organisers of that mother and toddlers group aren't included in the 15 head count, okay? Just continuing on the 12th of April, really important to remember at this stage that indoor events, you're trying to avoid indoor events that are bringing people together, because what we're wanting to achieve at this stage is that we're not having people mixing with other households. So it's trying to keep that to a minimum. When we get to stage 3 in the 17th of May, things will be more relaxed at that stage. But at this stage, you're trying to avoid the bringing together of households as much as possible. The only kind of caveat to that you do have to remember that the original exempt list that included support groups and communal worship and the kind of the wedding reception element that we've already talked about, they obviously are allowed. This is where it gets a bit complex and complicated. So those elements are allowed, but you are trying to avoid, with all of your other bookings, you're trying to avoid that mixing and mingling of households coming together. Obviously, social contact rules will apply throughout, meaning that, you know, social distancing must be maintained at all times. Hold on just a second. Okay, so then we need to look at, if you want to hold something like a car boot sale or an outdoor market, do check. We're advising you that these things are possible, that can go on in any outdoor space that you have available, but do check with your local authority to make sure that you don't need any additional licenses to cover these activities. As we understand it at this stage, local authorities are going to be issued with further government guidance on how to manage these types of outdoor events. So do check with your local authority just to make sure that they're happy the event goes ahead and they're content with the guidelines that you've set down in order to keep that event as COVID secure as possible. We have been asked also about outside exercise groups. And yes, they certainly can take place as of the 12th of April. And if you're, you could make your outdoor exercise group accessible to the toilets if you wanted to have that arrangement in place. So it might encourage groups to come back if they know that they can access the toilet facilities, but obviously changing rooms and showers are not open at this stage, and you would have to make sure that the hirer fully understands that. Libraries can open again from the 12th of April. So if you have a mini library or a kind of a book swap, book drop scenario, these facilities can reopen to the general public again. So you can open for that facility. And likewise, if you do have indoor markets and craft fairs, they can take place. But it's you know, it goes without saying, these have to be COVID secure events, face masks are worn, and social distancing needs to be considered at all times. Okay, so I'll hand back to Alison.
All right. Okay. So before we come on and look at step 3 and step 4, I suspect you're probably all now thinking about your own situations in your head. And some of you, no doubt, will be having hirers asking about resuming the permitted activities from the 12th of April. Some of you will be thinking, do you know what, that doesn't apply to me. I'm working towards being reopened from the 17th of May, which will be step 3. So we're a bit betwixt and between at the moment, but I think there's some sort of fundamental things that as you're starting to think about reopening that you need to understand. So we're just going to spend a little bit of time looking at these things next. The most important of those, you can see them on your screen now, but probably the most important of those that you just need to have quite a firm grip on is this understanding of the rule of 6 or 2 households. And Lisa's going to try and explain that to you now. I'd ask you to bear with us with this one. It is quite complicated to explain. So when Lisa's done explaining it for the first time, we'll just take a break, and then if there's any questions about the rule of 6, we'll happily take those then.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, and it is complex, and I will do my very best to try and make it straightforward. Okay, so government have decided to update the rule of 6 slightly, and it's now refers to the rule of 6 or 2 households coming together. So as you can imagine, 2 households coming together might actually form a group which is larger than 6 people. So that is perfectly okay to happen under the new rules. And obviously this would apply to the 12th of May for outdoor events, and then for the 17th of May for indoor events when we eventually get to that section. So management committees are responsible for setting up the room and to ensure that you're providing your seating set out in guidance with the rule of 6. It's not for trustees and volunteers or event organisers to manage individuals' behaviour. I need to be really clear about that. It's not your responsibility to be responsible for people or to challenge groups that come along to events. So if you do get people who come along and they say that they're 2 households coming together, you're to accept that on the trust that they're telling you the truth. What we're trying to do, or what government are trying to do with this, is it's about trying to avoid the mixing and mingling between groups. So it might be helpful if we kind of think about event planning and how seating can be managed, and how you can manage that rule of 6 or the 2 household scenarios, which I think is going to be quite complex for you, and is going to need a lot of discussion between you and your hirers to make sure that you're accommodating people's needs within the scenarios that might crop up. Let me think about, let me put this in terms of what some examples of what might roll out in terms of likelihood bookings for you. Let's start with quite an easy one, which is the yoga Pilates kind of mat-based exercise class, which is going to be fairly straightforward for you, in the sense that everybody arrives as individuals generally, and they would arrive, they're socially distanced as arriving from the car park into your building. They would have their allotted places at 2 meters set out for them to put their mats out. They lay their mats out on the floor. Once they've set up and they're on their mat, they're allowed to remove their face mask, complete the activity. If for any reason they need to get up throughout that activity, they would put their face masks back on. At the end of the activity, they would put their face mask on, pack their kit away, and everybody would leave as individuals. So I have been asked previously, oh, does the rule of 6 mean that I can only have 6 people in the room? No, what it means is that you can go up to your capacity, your COVID capacity for your room that you've already set out, but everybody must socially distance. So they're all individuals in that scenario. There is an added complication to this, in the sense of when you then start to apply this to activities such as Zumba, boot camps, and the more active activities, where they aren't on a mat, they're not kind of regulated in the sense that there's 2 meters apart. It's much more difficult to regulate that. So it's about how you talk to the tutor about how will social distancing be managed, and can people be put into groups of 6, so 6 individuals, or maybe it's a couples coming along to an event. So forming groups of 6 so that maybe 6 people are taking part in the event and another 6 people are sitting out, but but socially distancing from the other group. So it's going to take you communication with your hirers to make sure that you fully understand the needs of the group in terms of how that activity takes place and how that can then be accommodated within your COVID capacity numbers, but also applying the rule of 6. Another example which might help kind of formulate some of the things that you need to think about is kind of like the traditional kind of coffee morning scenario. So pre kind of lockdown, when you were open before, you had a COVID capacity of around 25 people. So you know that you can comfortably accommodate 25 people in your room. You might want to set out 5 or 6 tables, depending on your setup. And around those tables, you could perhaps have 6 people sitting around each table to form their group of 6. So everybody would arrive, hopefully in a kind of a staggered manner, so not everybody queuing at the door at once. They'd arrive in a socially distanced manner. They'd be allocated a table to sit at, maybe a couple come along. There's three sets of couples forming a group of 6 maybe, or 6 individuals coming along which form another group. Allocated their tables. It's worth bearing in mind that maybe some people don't want to sit in a group of 6, so you might have to accommodate people in smaller groupings. So there might be 2 ladies that come along that only want to be together and only want to talk together. So try and be flexible with your setup. The point to the rule of 6 is the fact that what you're trying to avoid is people mingling together. So once somebody is allocated into their group of 6, they would remain in their group of 6, and they would socially distance from every other group in the room. So it doesn't prevent people waving across the room, talking across the room, being social in that respect. But what you're trying to achieve is that only that 6 people together socially interact and socially distance from the rest of the room. So when it comes to serving food, what you might want to do is you could do a pre-booking system so that people let you know in advance that what coffees, teas, cake, whatever they want, and that could be served to the table. Or if you don't have enough volunteers to organise that, what you could do is you could have the kitchen then say, table number 1, please come and collect your tray, and the tray is ready for somebody to collect and take back to their table. What you need to try and do is avoid that queuing at the hatch kind of scenario, lots of people gathering. You're trying to keep movement around the room to a minimum. So even controlling that in terms of people going to the toilet, you don't want to have queues in the corridor, people queuing for the toilet. Try and keep all of that to an absolute minimum, and remembering that people have to wear face masks if they're moving around the room. And obviously not when they're eating and drinking, but they would have to wear their face masks at other times. One other point that kind of rolls out of that scenario is the same principles are laid down for sort of the classic quiz night situation. The other thing to remember with something like a quiz night where you have equipment is try to encourage people to bring their own pens and paper. And when it comes to scoring, don't swap your pieces of paper around. You're going to have to trust people to mark their own answers because you're trying to minimise that exchange of equipment to minimise the risk of a virus being passed on. So just to kind of finish on that, this is complex, but the important principle to the rule of 6 or 2 households is about avoiding the mingling and mixing of groups. So it's about the spread. And if you go to an event and, unfortunately, if there is somebody there who doesn't know that they have the virus and are contagious, the maximum people they could spread it to is the 6 people in that group, because the rest of the room is socially distancing. So if you kind of think through those scenarios and think through the classic one about, your visit to the pubs and the restaurants and how they manage their seatings and groupings, it's going to be exactly the same principle for you in your village hall in terms of how you're managing your seating arrangements. I hope that kind of is clear. As I say, we can. I don't know. Do you want to stop here?
Yeah, I was going to say before we move on, because I say we're sort of going to the next subject. If anybody's got any questions and wants to, I think Sally, you've got your hand up. If you'd like to unmute yourself and you can ask away.
Morning, everybody. Hi, Lisa. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Alison. Just thinking about what you said, so the coffee morning scenario that you just described, which I totally understand. So I'm talking about indoors, round a table, potentially you've got, let's say, 3 couples of 2, which satisfies the rule of 6. Just in terms of their sitting round the table, do they have to be 2 meters apart around that table?
No. So they can socially interact, the 6 around the table, but they are socially distancing themselves from the rest of the room.
Which is slightly, I mean, it's important. I thought that it's a bit bizarre, isn't it? I mean, in terms of me telling the guys in the village who go to that actually all of a sudden you can sit, which is good. Right, okay, that's what I thought.
I mean, I think the things I would say about that is, and somebody has just flashed a question up on that as well, is that yes, face coverings are still very important. So face coverings, unless you're exempt from wearing one, if you're over the age of 11, unless you're exempt from wearing one, i.e. you've got a good medical reason why you can't, you must keep your face covering on at all times unless you're eating and drinking.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say just about this rule of 6 is also that you may get people who aren't comfortable sitting in a group of 6, and that's absolutely fine, so it is about ensuring your hirers understand this whole rule of 6 thing. And obviously, you'll do that by giving them copies of your risk assessments and things like that, which we're going to come on to later. But then it's about them having the conversation with the people who come to the activities they organise and understanding what those people are wanting. Because, if you're perhaps an older person living by yourself in the village and you're venturing into the community building for the coffee morning, you want to start socialising with people again, but you may obviously have quite significant concerns about your own health and not want to be with 5 other people, obviously in a group of 6. So I think it is about, making sure that people have the opportunity to say what they're comfortable with. There's
also that expectation that you'll still be cautious, no hugging, no shaking hands, and keeping all of those principles in place. But in order to try and release us from the current situation, to be able to sit around a table with 6 people and have a chat, even if it is a cautious chat, is I think going to be quite useful for people, especially when they're isolated, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've just seen Karen's question in the chat, but I think if I could answer, just to be sure I've understood, the tables definitely have to be 2 meters apart.
That's right.
Yeah. 2 meters apart, yes.
That fits with your distancing.
Yeah.
So each group must be 2 meters from another group. The group itself can mingle and mix, but they can't mingle and mix with any other group in the room. And that's the way that you're limiting the spread of the virus.
And you don't want people interchanging from tables. So you don't want somebody hopping from one table to another. Well, I don't want to be part of that group now. I want to be part of that group. Once they're allocated their group of 6, they stick with that group of 6 throughout the event. Then they leave and, speak to those people afterwards or whatever, but the principle being is that once you're allocated your group of 6, you stick with that group of 6 throughout the event.
Yeah, and so very last quick question sort of linked to this, so that I understand, and then arguably you are bringing 6 people together at max, I know. In terms of the track and trace, and if anything were to happen and then knowing who you sat with, that's still with the QR codes and we know who's there, so then you have to contact.
Yeah, and it's probably worth noting who's on each table so that you actually you know which 6 were sitting together.
Is that the job of the people who organise it? Because that is, so I know.
That would be their responsibility to keep the information for 21 days.
Say that again, sorry, Lisa.
It would be their responsibility to keep that information for 21 days for track and trace purposes.
What the organise, I mean, it'd be me.
Organiser of an event, yes.
Yeah, so I'd have to know where they sat. So if I knew someone had got the virus, it's my job to let the other 5 know.
No, that would be down to track and trace. is
Yeah.
my
Hang on, I think we're getting a little bit confused here. We are going to come on to test and trace later.
yeah.
So hopefully we'll pick all that up then. I don't think there's any obligation in the law for you to know exactly who sat at what table. I don't think there's any need to keep a record of that at all. It'll be about whether the people were at the event, and that's obviously what we capture through test and trace. I don't think legally you have to actually note who sat at what table or anything like that.
Fine, thank you. I won't hog any more questions. Thank you.
Fine. There's a couple of people with their hands up. Chris at Madingley.
Yeah, could you just recap on the group of 6? Because if in a typical village hall situation, you've got a large table and you're inviting 6 people to sit at it, how on earth do you know that these people are safe one to another?
Sorry, that they're safe?
Between each other, that they're safe. They're not all from one household, clearly. They're probably not even from 2. They're probably, you know, this is the difficulty. Is
You don't. I mean, I think that is the potential danger in it.
There must be a huge risk here. You're actually bringing 6 people together who could be completely from 6 households.
Yes, I mean that's the government position, is that, you know, they have chosen 6 as a number that they think it's sort of reasonable that those 6 people can be in reasonably close contact, and there is the danger that if one of them is asymptomatic, has got the virus but is asymptomatic, they could spread it to those other 5 people. And that's why I'm saying I think it's very important that hirers are having those conversations with the people who are attending, or if it's like a free-for-all coffee morning where people are turning up, as people come in through the door, the hirer needs to be saying to that person, are you comfortable making up a group of 6, or would you rather sit with, you know, just one other person?
Yeah, and what you're doing here is you're bringing 6 people together in close proximity, which is the most dangerous thing you could possibly do.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they are still wearing face coverings apart from when they're
I appreciate that.
So you're limiting, you know, and also you're also doing all the other things, you know, which we're going to come on to, about, you know, how to keep your venue COVID secure, about ventilation, all those things that hopefully will minimise the risk of there being any spread of virus. But yeah, you're absolutely
table and
sticking with that. Yeah, but you're right, there is a risk, and I think, you know, I think what we're coming to realise is that COVID isn't going to go away anytime soon, and, you know, we're all going to have to take personal responsibility for thinking about the risks that we're prepared to take with our own health, you know. And I think that'll be for every individual to think, you know, am I comfortable going into this situation? We're all doing it already, you know. Am I comfortable going into Sainsbury's, or do I get my groceries delivered? You know, so it's the same situation. But I think as village hall trustees, our responsibility is about making it very clear what we've done to make our building as secure as we can, and, you know, having those conversations with our hirers to ensure that they're doing the same in how they run their activities.
But equally, as Alison, it's not our responsibility as trustees that's the judgment of the people that come along. You don't feel, you know, we say our bit, but make it clear that's the choice of that individual to come and
and so long as, you know, and it's a question that we've had before about trustee liability. So long as you have done all you can to make your building COVID secure, and to tell your hirers what you're expecting of them, and to set the parameters that you want them to organise their events within, you've done what you can. There's no then liability on you if somebody said, well, I got COVID when I went to that village hall. I mean, A, how are they going to prove it? But B, also, you know, so long as you've done everything that you can do, you know, you're covered. Linda at Halton's got your hand up. Hi. You need to unmute, Linda. Linda, you need to unmute. That's it.
Sorry. Did you say you can't have art groups?
Not
arts and crafts?
Not at April stage. If it's a group, an art class that's coming together, you need to wait until May.
May, okay. Sorry, yeah, that makes sense. So you can do it with art groups as long as they can keep separate, and the craft groups.
Yeah.
From step 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, Fran at Linton. Hi.
Yes, you say that we've got to set out the chair positions or the yoga mat positions, but our hall does all of these, and it would be difficult for us to set them out in a meaningful way. can we not agree that they set them out in a certain way, each of the groups?
Yes.
Yes, so the groups can do it. I'll give you the example. The yoga class that I attend, the yoga teacher arrives early before lockdown. She arrived early. She would put post-it notes at 2 meters apart in the room. So she took the responsibility for setting out the 2 meters. And then as attendees, we would come along and put our mats on the 2 meter spots that were identified. So you could do it by putting dots on the floor at 2 meters, or you could have that arrangement, but it's about being clear with your hirer about what the expectations are. If you're expecting them to arrange the 2 meter spacing, you just make sure that they're aware they've got to do that.
Right, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So are there any other questions about rule of 6 before? Hello, somebody else has just asked a question. Can't see how to put my hand up. Oh, hello, Jill at Hawkston. To unmute yourself and
Sorry, I just couldn't find the sign anywhere. You've been talking about coffee mornings and things. We kind of need to go a step back from that, because we've got a brand new hall that hasn't even been opened yet. Where we've got new equipment coming. I've got names of volunteers and things. I've got to train these people, and you know, you can't train to use a dishwasher and a coffee machine over Zoom and things. So I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions about how I can crack on with that and yet still try and open on the 17th of May.
So if you remember on one of the very early slides, I said about the voluntary, you can work in a voluntary capacity within your centre. So if you're showing people around or training people, you can do that as a volunteer from step, let me have a look, go back to where it was. So from the 29th of March onwards, you can you can have that as a volunteer. You can go in and you would be able to do the training, you would be able to show people around, because you're doing it in a voluntary capacity.
Sorry, is that only just with a group of 6?
You would have to have all of the social distancing measures in place, and you would have to ensure your building is COVID secure while you're doing that.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, presumably if you're doing a dishwasher, are you doing kind of like one-to-one training, or?
Well, we want to try and get, you know, a fair bit of training done together, and you know, there will be two or three of us doing the training. You know, it's going to take us forever if we've just got to do it with 3 other people.
Yeah, so
but we will if that's the rule. But
yeah, I would imagine, I don't know how Alison feels about that, but I would have thought the rule of 6 would apply to that, but just try and keep it to a minimum and just make sure you've got all of the COVID secure procedures in place.
Yes, yeah, I think that would work. That's how I would do it. I mean, again, you know, it's about, you know, if we think about what we're trying to achieve with the rule of 6, it's about ensuring that we're not transmitting the virus to a lot of people. So, you know, for everybody's sake, it's probably a sensible, you know, ratio of people to work to.
Okay, thank you.
Right, okay, I think we better move on, otherwise we'll get a little bit behind. And the next thing I was going to talk to you about, because I know a lot of community buildings are used by parish councils, even if it's not the parish council running the building, the parish council uses the building for its meetings and that. Or obviously hasn't been until this point, because the government did pass some emergency legislation back in the start of the pandemic that allowed all local authorities, including parish councils, to hold their meetings online. And I think most parish councils, fair to say, have adapted really well to that and have found that, you know, holding their meetings on Zoom to be a marvellous thing. But unfortunately, what's happened now is the government that legislation times out on the 7th of May, and the government has made it very clear that they don't intend to extend that. Certainly the local government association and now I think are sort of lobbying that online meetings might be allowed to continue, but at the moment not is the answer to that. So as village halls, you are likely to be getting inquiries about holding parish council meetings again. And as I say, although the legislation for online meetings runs out on the 7th of May, obviously holding indoor meetings is really only likely to be from step 3, which is likely to be the 17th of May. So it's really just making you aware of that. The other thing to be aware of also is that most all parishes have an annual parish meeting, which is usually organised by the local council, although I think legally it doesn't have to be, it could be somebody else organising it, but in most cases it will be the parish council that organises it. Quite often these will take place in community buildings. There is a deadline by which those annual parish meetings have to be held under the Local Government Act, and that's the 1st of June. So there's going to be quite a sort of a tight window where you might be asked to host an annual parish meeting between the 17th of May and the 1st of June. And again, it, you know, as trustees, you know, it'll just be about you making sure that the parish council whose meeting it is, if they're the organiser, understands what the rules are that you require in your hall. But it is just about making you aware that might need to happen. The other thing, obviously, just to mention, I think Lisa mentioned at the start about polling stations. Obviously, we have got local elections coming up on the 6th of May. And a lot of community buildings are used as polling stations. If they are, once again, the responsibility will be on the hirer, so the organiser of the election. So in most cases, that's going to be the district council, to put all the measures in place that they need to hold that election safely in your building. So they will do their own risk assessments. They will most likely ask you for a copy of your building risk assessment, and as I say later, we're going to talk about how you do those. But they will come equipped with all the equipment that they need and all the volunteers and staff they need to make sure that election runs safely. So they will take care of all the social distancing. They will bring all the equipment, etc. We did have a question, I think it's popped up in the last couple of sessions, about on 6th of May, obviously, you know, theoretically your buildings aren't open to public events apart from these exempt activities, and would it be okay for those running the election to use your kitchen facilities? And yes, of course it would. It would be very unfair to say that they couldn't boil a kettle all day. So that is absolutely fine. So just to make you aware of that, and they will obviously take responsibility for, you know, ensuring the building is clean throughout the day and making sure it's safe for people to come into.
Alison, I think you've got a question from Sally.
Oh, I think I've got some chat and some live. So let's take the live ones. Sally, you've got your hand up. Hi.
Just very briefly on the AGM, if the deadline to have the AGM is the 1st of June, and obviously this year with an AGM, any number of the member of public can come, but that's not going to be feasible. How do you get round that? If after the 21st of June, you can have as many people as possible, but if the deadline to have your AGM is the 1st of June.
It's not your AGM, it's your annual parish meeting, and the only reason I'm saying that is that there is a difference, because obviously parish councils have an annual meeting where they elect their chairs, etc., things like that. The annual parish meeting is about where the parish council reports back to the general population about what it's done. It can also invite other groups to come along and present back on their activities. So as a village hall, you might be invited to the annual parish meeting to talk about what you've done. I think there is a bit of a problem there, because obviously theoretically, you know, from the 17th of May, you're allowed to have indoor meetings, but your COVID secure capacity of your venue is still going to apply. So I think there will be some delicate management to be done about how that happens, and I don't think really it's been bottomed out how that is going to happen. I guess it might have to be a sort of, you know, do you want to attend, so we can get an idea of numbers.
Well, that's what we're doing. I just was putting it out there because it's exactly what.
Yeah, I think that's what you know, whoever the organizer of the annual parish meeting is going to have to say is, you know, if you would like to come to this meeting, you know, please let us know so we can get an idea of numbers, and they'll have to do it that way, I think.
Okay, thank you.
There were some other questions I think had come in on chat. I'm not just going to cover those before we go on to the next thing. Quick query on the wake and wedding point you made on step 2, 12th of April. Sorry, that was you again, Sally.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. No, it's fine. We like lots of questions.
Is this all right, interrupting?
Yes,
I appreciate your time. Yeah, just to qualify, Lisa, I don't know whether it was accidental, whether I misunderstood. So on the 12th of April, wakes and wedding, if you just go back to that slide, is that you can have a wake and wedding indoors, or something that contradicted what you said? They can.
Yeah, so new guidance came out around the weddings, which said that let me just find. Okay.
You were on that slide a minute. You were there on that one, 3rd bullet point. Yeah, just.
So on the 25th of February, new guidance came out which said that wedding receptions had to be outdoor receptions with a sit-down meal.
So you did mean outdoor, you did mean outdoor.
Yeah, I did mean outdoor. That didn't apply, interestingly enough, and I don't quite know where they see the difference, but that piece of new guidance didn't include wakes.
Right.
So that's, you know, it is what it is, I'm afraid. That's the guidance that's come out.
So outdoor on the 12th, and then from the 17th of May, indoor.
Yeah, and then they can move indoor.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
There's been a couple of other just points on the chat about using kitchens, and that's something we're going to cover off later. So if you can just sort of hold those thoughts in your mind, and when we talk about kitchen use later, we'll pick that up. I think Lisa's going to come on and talk about your own trustee meetings now.
Okay, so in terms of your own trustee meetings, ACRE advises that trustees should not come together for a physical meeting until after the 17th of May. And obviously we're assuming that the timeline isn't going to change. You know, if there is a halt, if government do halt this process, obviously it would put it back further. So it is suggested that in the meantime that you're relying on Zoom meetings, email exchanges and phone conversations to hold your meetings. If you are in a position, and this kind of goes back to the voluntary, where I mentioned earlier about in a voluntary capacity, you can come together. So technically as trustees, you are all volunteers. So if there is an emergency situation, you can hold a meeting, but certainly the advice at the moment is it is much better to wait until the 17th of May to hold your physical meeting. What I would say is if you are you know, over the last year, you have been holding telephone meetings, Zoom meetings, it's really important that you are keeping a minuted record of any decisions that are taken at those meetings, and that you then ratify those decisions appropriately when you are able to come back together. Many of you will have postponed your AGMs from last year, and really you're going to be looking until after the 17th of May to hold your AGMs this year. So just bear that in mind. You know, it might be again a delay in terms of what your governance actually stipulates within your governing document. It's really important that as a management committee, if your AGM does fall before then, that you have your management committee, you know, over Zoom, or it could be classed as an emergency meeting to clear up the business, that you're agreeing your annual reports, you're agreeing your accounts as a management committee, and that you're doing your annual returns with the Charity Commission. The element after that, in terms of your public facing AGM, you can then delay that and then hold your AGM as required within your governing document after the 17th of May. Again, it goes back to that whole COVID secure capacity. I know AGMs generally aren't fully packed with people raring to come along, but you might want to think through, if you have had a busy year, if there have been controversial decisions, if there has been a development proposal for your new building or something like that that will cause public interest, you might want to consider having a booking system so that you can make sure that you stick within your COVID capacity numbers for your AGM when it comes round.
Okay, I just wanted to just briefly mention NHS Test and Trace. There's the government regulations for the collection of contact details are still in place, and we expect them to stay in place until at least step 4. So, you know, we're looking sort of like towards the end of June for that. What those regulations say is that every hirer entering a community hall must either every hirer using the hall must either collect individual contact details or must ensure that all their participants scan the QR code that you display at your hall. So your obligation as the provider of the facility is to display a QR code. So if you haven't already got a QR code, in the information pack we're going to send you after this session, there'll be guidance on how to get a QR code. It's literally you go onto our website and register and you print it out. So that's straightforward. and that's your obligation then fulfilled. We have just received some latest guidance, apparently, that some venues have received an email asking them to update their QR code. That is a legitimate email that's coming out of government. So if you do receive one of those, then please do update your QR code. Go onto the website and print a new one out, would say that. So I say your obligation is to display the code. Your hirer's obligation is to make sure everybody who attends their activity either scans that code if they can, and obviously if they can't, because obviously we do realise some people don't have the mobile phones to be able to do that, then the obligation is on the hirer to collect those individuals' contact details and to hold those for 21 days after their event, just in case there is any outbreak of COVID and those people need to be traced by the NHS. And obviously after the 21 days, if there's no contact from the NHS, then obviously those details can be confidentially destroyed. Obviously it is people's personal data, so obviously just be aware, you know, your hirers need to be aware of that and shred that data as opposed to just flinging it in the bin. I think that's probably all I need to say on that one. As we've been going through this, we've mentioned it several times and not yet explained it as to what your community buildings COVID-19 secure capacity is. Because obviously what we're saying now is that community buildings can begin to be used, you know, firstly from the 12th of April and then from the 17th of May for more indoor activities, but you will need to operate within your COVID-19 secure capacity. And the simplest way of explaining what that is to say it's 25% of your normal seating capacity. So if your hall normally has seating, you know, round tables for 100 people, then under COVID secure guidelines, that needs to go down to 25 people. So it is quite strict. What I would say, and that's my note at the bottom there, is that 25% of your usual capacity is based on there being 2 meters social distance between every person in that hall. And if you think about the nature of the activities you run in your hall, sometimes people don't need to keep 2 meters social distance between them because they're part of the same household. So as you know, going back to Lisa's examples earlier, you know, the yoga group, that's a very good example because people go as individuals, they absolutely need to keep 2 meters social distance between them. If it was, I don't know, a coffee morning that was perhaps some couples coming to that coffee morning together, you know, each couple does not need to keep 2 meters between them because they're part of the same household anyway. So in that instance, there is a little bit of elasticity to that COVID secure capacity. And again, it's a little bit tricky it's not tricky to get your head around. I mean, it is what it is, but it is a little bit, how do you apply it fairly? How elastic is that capacity? And again, I think it's, you know, it might be helpful for you as a committee to say to your hirers, this is the figure that we're working to, this is the figure that you can work to. If then a hirer says to you, but you know, this is the activity, and between you agree that activity is actually going to be, you know, some families perhaps coming together, you can then obviously give them permission to extend that capacity very slightly. I mean, I think it's a case of don't go mad, you know, think about what we're trying to do here. We're trying to ensure that you know, the virus can't transmit easily, that you know, we're keeping our capacity at a level where there's plenty of room between people so people can move about without you know, having to get into close contact with others. But you know, there is that little bit of fluidity, if you like, in that capacity limit. Just the other thing to mention there is obviously, again, it's sort of just that perhaps contradicts very slightly with what we were saying about the ability to hold weddings with 30 people there. So if, for example, in this particular example, this hall's COVID secure capacity is 25 people, you could take a booking for a wedding for 30 people, because it comes back to my point around the people who are going to that wedding are likely to be in family groups, not all attending as individuals, and therefore, you know, they don't necessarily need to keep 2 meters between every single person who's at that wedding. So yeah, it's just having that sort of calculation in the back of your minds, I think. The other thing, sorry, perhaps I should have explained this right at the beginning, is that as well as the recording of this session and the slides that we're showing you, we're also going to be sending you a sort of resource pack, what we're calling a reopening pack of information. And one of the documents that's in that pack is a table of all the activities that can potentially take place in village halls. It's something that's been put together across the ACRE network, across the whole of England. So it should have every possible activity that you can find in a village hall on that list, and then across the list is all the different steps, and you'll be able to see what activities can take place at what step, and then there's some notes about if there's any particular guidance around running that activity. But we've found it quite a useful table for understanding what can take place from what date, so you'll definitely be receiving that after this event. Pat, you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hello, yes, I will. Really sorry, I'm going backwards a bit. I've been desperately trying to find, while you were talking, a section that I found. It's about not being able to hold physical meetings. So I know I'm going back. But I have found on the government website, and I can send you the link to it, at the bottom of the page, because we're being told we can't hold virtual meetings after the 7th of May.
Yeah.
On the government website, it says all of that. Then at the bottom, it clearly says meetings where local authorities deem that in-person attendance is not required should continue to be held virtually. Only absolutely necessary participants should physically attend meetings and should maintain social distancing, obviously, and with the mitigations. But it clearly says there that they should continue to be held virtually. So we're being given two. On the one hand, they're saying you can't, and then on their website, it says you must. And
unfortunately, I think as Lisa will back me up on this, throughout this whole last year, you know, we've been absolutely fed up to the back teeth of, you know, guidance saying one thing and then the next day saying something else entirely, or a little caveat that really just doesn't make any sense at all. If you would, Pat, if you could send us that link, that would be really helpful. We can look at that. And just then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to compile a Q&A from all the questions that we've had across the 4 sessions we've delivered, and we can provide some clarity on that as best we can. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't, you know, if that's what the guidance says, it's absolutely mad, isn't it? Because that makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, it just helps. Sorry, Lisa.
No, I was going to say, just to add to that, there's been a question raised through our national advisors kind of chat group, where yes, on one hand, ACRE are advising that after the 17th of May, that's when you can have physical meetings. There is kind of this other piece of advice from government which actually says that volunteers can meet and can hold meetings, so voluntary organisations can meet, and charities. So that you know, with that alone, there is this conflict that's being looked at by National ACRE. So it isn't clear. It is very complex.
Well, it's sort of, it's leaving it up to you, isn't it? Which is the best email to forward this to?
So you can send it to me, Pat. It's alison.brown@camsacre.org.uk.
Well, I can't type now. I'm trying to.
Oh, don't worry.
Sorry. At
we'll let you carry on with that.
Okay,
and then
thank you.
Lisa's going to come on and talk about step 3.
Sure. Okay. Right. Okay. So we're now looking at 17th of May, and we're hoping that, providing it all goes according to plan and the brakes aren't put on, that we'll be heading towards something of normality in terms of activities that can go on in your facilities, providing it's held in a COVID secure manner. I think, you know, we still need to be really cautious around this in terms of what might happen. What happens if, you know, the R rate increases? What happens if there's a new variant that comes on board? So I would suggest that if you are taking bookings in advance, looking towards May and beyond, that you are making your hirers aware that there might be an opportunity that you're going to have to cancel that event at very short notice if the government do put the brakes on, if there is a change in circumstances. Just make your hirers fully aware that you know that this is unknown territory at the moment. We were asked a question in advance of these sessions about controlled events, and the first bullet point there covers controlled events. And at this stage, all we can say is that our interpretation of a controlled event is an event that is being organised by an official body, if you like, so a charity or a business or a local authority. However, saying that, the most recent piece of government guidance that has come out is government are now seem to be dropping this phrase controlled indoor events. So I'm not quite sure whether they will continue with that terminology or not. If you think of it as events that are avoiding people mingling together and congregating in one area. So it might be that you're organising an event where you can, I don't want to use the word police, but where you can manage the event quite strictly. So let's think of it in terms of events like film shows, plays, public meetings, large dinners, performances, those things where you have, you know, people who are in controlled seating. They've maybe booked their seating so that you know how many are booking together as a family unit. You can control people who are receiving their refreshments, getting up and going to the toilet. Those sorts of things we would see as a controlled event. And as you can see on the slide, they are events, as Alison was saying earlier, where you can use that flexibility and maybe increase your capacity to 50%. So I hope that kind of helps. I don't know if you want to add to that, Alison, because this is kind of new emerging stuff, isn't it, that we're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, I think all I would say is, yeah, Lisa's absolutely right. This is all emerging now. If you think about what's happened at step 2, so step 2 happens from Monday, but we didn't really get the announcement about that until this Monday just gone, so from the 5th of April. So I'm expecting that, you know, if step 3 does happen on the 17th of May, from 17th of May, about a week before that, again, we'll probably have Boris on telly giving his announcement, and at that point you tend to find all the cogs start whirring away, and we get a lot more guidance given to us from government, and at that point we'll be able to give you a little bit more information as we get it. It's just, you know, as Lisa says, you know, they started using this term controlled indoor events. They then seem to have dropped it. But as Lisa's saying, what we're thinking is that for certain types of events where the organiser has a particular level of control over how people behave in that room, you might then be able to take your COVID secure capacity that we've just talked about and raise it from 25% up to 50%. But as I say, we'll give you more information on that as we get it ourselves.
Okay, so just the second slide here in terms of continuing what's going to happen around the 17th of May. Obviously, we've been reiterating about the rule of 6 all through this presentation, and that will still apply to indoor events. But we're expecting, and I can only say expecting at this stage, is that the rule of 6 will be abolished for outdoor gatherings after the 17th of May. Just need to be really clear. So rule of 6 applies outdoor at the moment, but we're expecting when it comes to step 3 after the 17th of May that the rule of 6 could be dropped. But obviously guidance could change on that. So we know that government are looking about the all of the social contact between friends and families and how this will be managed as we go forward. And all we can say is that, you know, as soon as we get that information, we can pass that on to village halls in terms of what that might look like. They've talked about vaccine passports, and it's been very very popular in the news, hasn't it, about what that might look like. And we are really hoping that if there is something like a vaccine passport that comes out, that's only going to apply to larger venues such as stadiums or theatres, and that it won't impact on village halls and community centres. But as soon as we get that information, we can let everybody know. Step 4, you know, it's really difficult to look this far ahead actually at the moment. We've got this kind of sketchy view that you know, we're hoping that the social contact issues will be removed, that, you know, outdoor events will be okay to take place, and, you know, we'll be looking at more kind of normal events in terms of weddings with dancing and all of those sorts of things. But it still is an unknown area, and so we will be able to update everybody as soon as everything becomes more firm. But this is the position that you're looking at the moment. Okay, I think we were going to break at this stage, weren't we?
Has anybody got any other questions they'd like to ask before we take a short break? Hi, Sally.
I'm one of those, aren't I? I just want, I guess this is a bit of a, I think I understand everything, but just, I've had this fear of potentially the fact the halls are opening to kind of celebrate it in a form, and perhaps having outside coffee takeaway, and people can come along to outside and you give them a coffee. But I'm feeling the vibe really of all of this, although I feel that's from our part potentially encouraging. It's going to be very hard as people rock up. Okay, they know they should stay in a household or two households, a group of 6. But in essence, because we're saying come and grab a coffee and say hello, I just wondered what your vibe. I feel that's kind of still encouraging. Yeah, but it's a bit of mingle. Are you really going to guarantee they can walk away and not chat? It's sort of the whole ethos of that is a bit too mingle. Would you agree? My gut is I don't think that sets a very good example from that.
It's one of, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we'd all love to celebrate the fact that we can actually start doing, you know, some of these things again. But it does feel a bit like, are we setting ourselves up for them people breaking the rules
a bit too early?
A bit too early.
Club the high risk.
Yeah. And it might be better to do it, you know, leave it until sort of June time, when, you know, hopefully by step 4, when the restrictions on people meeting outdoors then will hopefully be entirely lifted, and perhaps that's a better date to sort of aim for.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Hi, Chris at Madingley.
Hi, yeah. One thing I'm a little unclear about is the COVID safe capacity of a hall, and you talk about it being based on your capacity of a flat floor hall, and I just wonder what other people use for a formula. I mean, I've sort of inherited a set of numbers, you know, they're being collected over many years. You say, okay, the hall capacity once was down as 120. Now, of course, it's down to kind of 80 because it provides more space and better safety. Then we get COVID, and you think, is the COVID safe capacity based on 80 people standing and dancing? Is it based on 40 people seated on chairs in rows? Is it based on square meterage?
Yeah, it's based on your seated. So obviously, if the event, I mean, so yes, you're absolutely right. You could potentially apply a different COVID safe capacity depending on the seating arrangements. So obviously, you know, if your seated capacity in rows is, you know, 150, you could obviously have slightly more people still at the COVID safe limit than you could if you were having people around tables. So yeah,
so, and what you're saying is take the normal maximum seated in rows capacity of the hall that you would, if you had it as a lecture theatre.
Yeah, obviously depending on the activity. So if the person's saying, I want to have a quiz night, don't go with the capacity based on people seated in rows, because at a quiz night people don't sit in rows, do they? No, you know, they sit around tables in their quiz teams. So then you'd obviously have to think about what your capacity is in people sitting around tables, which is usually lower than it is in a sort of theatre style arrangement, and then use your input your 25% at that as opposed to the overall.
Yeah, but nobody's ever put any numbers out that says, you know, alternatively you could base it on a square meterage in a flat floor hall.
Yeah, you could. I mean, I think the reason that ACRE is saying just go with people's seated capacities, because that's normally something that trustees have a bit of a grip on, because you know how many tables and chairs you've got, or you know, if you set your chairs out in rows, you know how many. You know, so that's a firm figure that people can grab onto.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Debbie at Brampton, I think you had your hand up. Hi. You need to unmute, Debbie.
Yeah, sorry, just unmute. We're opening on the 12th of April. We've got a couple of children's groups coming back, 15 maximum. We've also got a couple of other groups chomping at the bit to get back. One's Slimming World. Now, are they allowed? They're an evening group just for a pay and weigh in. So if they follow the guidelines, 6 in, say, and then out the other side, at the fire exit, are they allowed?
So the guidance we have on Slimming Watch at the moment, you would have do a one-to-one, you can come in, do a weigh-in,
Right.
and then the individual leaves. So it's only a one-on-one basis, and then they can do their Zoom. Because that's the way they're operating at the moment, aren't they? They're doing Zoom catch-ups afterwards. So it will weigh-in purposes at this stage.
Right, so they are allowed. And the other one is karate groups. We've got a children's group coming back, but we've also got somebody who has adult group. Presumably that's the 17th of May, the same as exercise classes, is it?
April stage.
Yeah.
After May.
Right, okay, lovely, thank you.
Sorry, I don't think people could hear you very clearly there, Lisa, about, I'm not sure if it was you or what the sound issue was.
I think there was a bit of interference, maybe background interference there. So, yeah, so for Slimming World...
now it's happening again, Lisa.
Yeah, hold on. I'll just mute Debbie, because I think that's where the problem was coming from. Okay, so for Slimming World, the ACRE guidance, this has been obviously quite a popular question across the country. So it is something that we've picked up through the network. Slimming World can have one-to-one sessions, so they can offer a weigh-in, or Slimming World or Weight Watchers. I mustn't be prescriptive on one of them. They can have a one-to-one weigh-in session. So the lady would set up, have her scales, and individuals can come in and leave, have their weigh-in session, and then she would operate her interactive chat on over Zoom at this stage. Is that okay?
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Right, okay, I think we'll take just a short break now, just for you to all to grab a cup of coffee, and you'll all have other things you need to get off to. Right, okay. So this part of the session is sort of starting to think about the practical things you need to do regarding reopening, and you'll see some of those things on the screen there. It talks about a reopening checklist, and that's one of the documents we're going to send you after this session, and that's just a series of steps that you just need to think about, and you can be thinking about those now, whether you're opening next week or whether you're opening in May, but some of the critical things that you must do. So we've talked quite often about how you need to talk to your hirers and actually find out what they're expecting when they come back, you know, and what their needs are going to be. Are they going to need sort of longer sessions? Are they going to need, as Lisa mentioned, double sessions, things like that? So, or are they coming back at all? So I think good to have that conversation with those people. Other things to pick out, I think, particularly around fire safety and other health and safety assessments. You know, you may have had some work done on your hall over the last 12 months. You may well have missed out on doing your your annual fire safety assessment because, you know, you were closed at the time it was due. So dig those documents out, make sure they are up to date. And if they're not, then obviously do some work on those now so that they're ready to go as and when, and you know you've done everything that you should have done. There's a note there about Legionella. Now, obviously, if you've sort of got a closed water system and it's not been in use for several months, there is a risk from Legionella. It's a small risk, but it's worth managing. And again, we'll send you some information regarding that. Talking to your staff, if you do have paid staff, or even if you have sort of staff who volunteer for you, I think that's really important. They may well have some concerns about reopening, and it's important as an employer, good employer one way or the other, to understand those and to deal with those concerns. And the last point there is what we're now going to really focus on for the remainder of this session, which is about how to ensure your building meets COVID secure guidelines. and Lisa's just going to bring up the key points from those guidelines there. And we're going to talk through each of these individually. But the first one that I'm going to focus on is about undertaking your COVID-19 risk assessment. Okay, so again, this is a template that we are going to circulate to you after this event. If you did manage to open your hall during the period that you were allowed to do that last year, you may well have undertaken a COVID-19 risk assessment at that point. The template that we're now using is very, very similar, but it has been just updated slightly, obviously, to reflect the guidance around rule of 6 and 2 households. So it's worth if you have already got a risk assessment, worth comparing it with the new template, just to ensure it's picking up those points. Obviously, if you haven't done a risk assessment before for COVID-19, now's the time to do it. You will need to obviously share that assessment with your hirers. So it's important that you obviously think about doing that now. We would say about obviously consulting your staff if you do have them, because that's good practice when conducting a risk assessment. And I think perhaps the most important thing is that the point that's highlighted there is, don't attempt to reopen until you know you've got that risk assessment in place, that you have identified all the potential issues and you have thought through how you're going to guard against them happening. I think, people sometimes see risk assessments as bureaucratic, but, at the end of the day, it's about protecting you. Once you've done your risk assessment, identified all the things that might go wrong and thought about how you're going to prevent those happening, as a committee, you can then sit back and think, yeah, we've done our bit, and that's it, that's important. Just the other thing I would say is whilst it's perfectly okay for one of your committee to actually take on the task of doing the risk assessment, it is something that collectively as a management committee you need to sign off. It is you are collectively responsible for health and safety at your building, so please don't just pass it off to one person and think, well, that's their lookout. You all need to own that and understand it. I think Lisa's now going to talk about minimising contact with individuals who are unwell.
We're looking at individuals taken unwell in your building. The first thing really is to display a poster at your entrance, really requesting that if anybody is feeling unwell, that you really, rather they weren't actually coming into the setting, and what is expected of those individuals. So we do have again some resources that we can send to you so that you have a template for that poster when your resource pack comes out to you. The last point on this slide here is around what happens when somebody is taken ill in your building, if they're taken ill in your building. Previously, we were advising that you needed to have a separate room and kit set aside, ready and prepared if someone was taken ill in your facility. It's now considered, that's been scaled back a bit, and it's not considered necessary any longer to have a specific place that you would isolate somebody in. But it's probably going to be good practice that you help somebody to an office area or a small meeting room, just somewhere where they can go until they are collected either by an ambulance or they're taken away by friends and family from the building. What you need to really think about is the procedure that you need to put in place in order to make sure that you've done that deep clean of your building if this matter ever arises for you. There is very clear guidance on the government website, and we can send you the link for cleaning of a non-healthcare setting. So there is protocol laid down for it, and I would absolutely recommend that you get the kit in place so you've got plenty of PPE ready just in case, so plenty of rubber gloves and disposable equipment for either volunteers or your staff to use to do a deep clean, or maybe you'll be getting in a professional company to do the deep clean. The one thing you need to remember is when you have got when you've done the clean and you've got the refuse remaining, the things you need to throw away, these things should be double bagged. You need to store them for 72 hours in a secure place. That's the amount of time they believe that the virus continues to be active for. Once you've passed the 72 hours, then we're told that those items can then be disposed of in your normal waste method, in your normal refuge bins. So I would absolutely recommend that you make sure that you've got those protocols clearly written down so that everybody understands what's expected of them, so the management committee understand what their responsibilities are and what they plan to do, and that your volunteers or your cleaning staff absolutely know what the process is. And if you're in a position where you are hiring the facility out, but as trustees you're not in the building or you don't have staff in the building, make sure that your hirer is aware of what you expect to happen if somebody is taken poorly, and who they should notify in order to close the building, and obviously then to activate that process of closing and ensuring the deep clean takes place. Okay. Right, so we're now going to look at, again, a bit more cleaning. So it's a really good idea in your buildings to make sure that, and I'm sure you had them up previously before lockdown, the second lockdown, but display those reminders about, hand washing, good hygiene, making sure people are reminded about wearing face masks in your building. And of course, all of these notices and requirements will be in place until at least the 21st of June. And it might be worth reflecting on the fact that, we've already heard government announcing that, or the health professionals announcing that there may be a spike at in the next winter, as we kind of come around to the whole flu season scenario again. So it's probably not a bad message to continue having up displayed in your facility about the hand washing protocols, and making sure we're keeping people as safe as possible. Again, all of these resources will be available in your resource pack, and if there is anything that you're particularly looking for and you can't find the resource pack, just let us know and we'll see if we can source it for you. In terms of cleaning your facility, I've been asked on lots of occasions about, what products should you use. As we understand it, the advice is that supermarket products are perfectly okay. Just make sure that you're using something that is going to kill, and I think they're advertised as kills 99% of virus and bacteria. So just check the packaging. I think some of them are even advertising to, kill COVID these days. So check your packaging to make sure you're buying something that's appropriate for your facility. It might be better to use supermarket stuff than commercial, special professional commercial products, because if you're asking hirers to do the cleaning when they're, before and after their sessions, the supermarket products are going to be something that they're more familiar with handling. So, if they're familiar with it, they'll understand how to use it. But do make sure that you leave instructions so that people are aware of health and safety issues. And if they need rubber gloves, that they must bring their own rubber gloves with them to use, because obviously you don't want lots of hands going in one pair of rubber gloves. If you're in the lucky position that you've actually got paid staff to do your cleaning on a daily basis, then you could display a poster which actually shows the time that the last clean happened. It's something that might reassure people, especially people who are quite nervous about coming back into into public buildings. It might reassure them on the fact that they know that the building has been thoroughly cleaned that morning. Again, it's another tool that you can perhaps use. Having said that, it is perfectly okay for trustees to discharge the responsibility of cleaning to the hirer, and as I've already said, the expectation is before and after the session. I think one of the things that when we ran similar sessions to this before, one of the things that trustees were particularly concerned about was the quality of cleaning that people might be doing. And I think this is why ACRE have always suggested the before and after scenario, because if you're cleaning before your activity starts, you're cleaning to your standard to make sure that all of the equipment you're likely to touch is clean, and then you're cleaning it at the end to make sure that for the next people coming in, it's a clean environment. So it's kind of like a double catch-all, really. Really important, I think, to have that communication with your hirers to make sure if you're asking them to clean, that you're making them aware of the areas that you want them to clean. So it might be an idea to have a checklist, just as a reminder for individuals, that you're asking them to clean the tables, the chairs, the you know, the door handles, whatever the scenario is for that particular situation. If they've got a checklist, they know exactly what it is that you're asking them to do. Areas such as floors, really that will be down to larger jobs, kitchen appliances, floors, things like that, are down to, you know, your arrangements in terms of cleaning your building. And again, it might be something that you want to develop with your cleaning staff, just to make sure that they're carrying out what you consider to be a COVID secure clean of the facility, a checklist, just to make sure that everything is done, and you know, you can evidence that. When talking about electrical sockets and electrical equipment, it might be really worth to leave a message, you know, within your if you're doing a check sheet, or put a notice up, just so people are aware that, you know, spray the cloth and not the light switch to wipe it down clean. It sounds obvious, but not everybody might know those principles around you know, electric sockets and electric equipment. So just be really, really clear about your health and safety aspect, and your expectation of people. And obviously you can consider that through your risk assessment process. You know, there was quite a bit of worry, I think, from, as I say, from the last time we ran these sessions, with trustees worrying about discharging this responsibility to hirers. But, you know, I think the feedback we're getting is that it's perfectly okay, and should work perfectly well when asking your hirers to carry out this function. I think it's about communication and just being really clear with them about, you know, what your expectations are, and allowing them the time, you know, the time to be able to do the job adequately. So allowing them plenty of time within their booking. One of the things that you will have to do as an organisation is make sure that you're allowing time either for your volunteers, staff, cleaners, whoever the responsibility might fall to check the levels of sanitizer and cleaning materials that are available on the day. The last thing you want is to run out halfway through the day, especially if you're quite a busy building. So, you know, do factor that in, that you will need to do spot checks just to make sure that everything is as it should be. One of the other areas that you might want to think about is where groups have historically stored stuff in your building. They may have stored it in your building while it's been locked these last few months. So the groups might want to come back and clean their equipment ready to go. But the other aspect of storing equipment in your building is to make sure there is no cross-contamination between groups. So you might want to review how the storage, how things are stored in your building, or maybe suggest to a group that they don't want to bring back quite as much stuff at this time, because you need to make sure that there is plenty of space between all of the group's stored equipment. And storage is always one of those contentious areas for village halls, isn't it? There is never enough space. So you talk to your hirers about that, and just make sure that you don't forget that those areas have got to be COVID secure, just the same as any functioning part of the building. And last point around the booking secretary. It's really important that the booking secretary has that good relationship with the hirers, that they understand that, you know, the times that the people are booking for, but also allowing plenty of time for the hirer to clean through the building at the beginning and at the end, and that they've got sufficient time to leave the car park before the next group arrive. So this will impact on the capacity that you have in terms of the amount of people you can accommodate in a day, but it's really important to factor in that space so people have got time to do the cleaning and to leave. Just looking at some of the points around social distancing, and we'll kind of start with a word on catering. So catering, no village hall is like another village hall. Everybody is quite unique in terms of size and scale. So very much a common sense approach needs to be applied in this area. But certainly face masks should be worn at all times in kitchen areas. There are some exemptions for face masks in terms of safety aspect. So with somebody wearing glasses, like I'm wearing glasses today, sometimes my face mask does make my glasses steam up, which causes a bit of a problem. I'm sure many of us suffer with the same problem. So if you, for example, chopping something in a kitchen and this is causing visual problems, you would be allowed to remove your face mask in order to do that action. The other areas it kind of crops up is sewing groups. Also, if you think around the threading the needle, dealing with sewing machines, sharp equipment, scissors, they would also be allowed to remove their face mask while handling things that, you know, that likely they could injure themselves with. So it's worth bearing that in mind and again, talking to your hirers about their particular scenario. Just returning to the catering aspect, if you've got a short meeting booked, you might want to encourage the people who have booked the meeting to either bring their own bottle of water or bring their own flask of tea. It would cut down on the cleaning aspect for you, because you then wouldn't have to arrange for the kitchen to be cleaned, or they wouldn't have to clean the kitchen after their meeting. Longer meetings and small events, I'll use the example after we get to the kind of May time and you've got the art class coming back. They might want to use the kitchen to make their own refreshments, and then it is just a case of being clear with them about what your expectation is in terms of wiping down the area, the work surfaces, but not forgetting things like the kettle. Obviously the kettle gets handled by a lot of people, or the hot water boiler. There is also a health and safety risk attached to hot items, so just be really clear with people about, you know, what you want them to wipe down, or if in fact that, you know, you need to make arrangements that the kitchen then can't be used until your cleaners have come in and wiped it through. So just think about those aspects. And I would recommend that, you know, don't have tea towels available in your kitchen for hirers. Nothing harbours germs like a tea towel, does it? So, you know, remove your tea towels and ask the hirers if they wish to use the kitchen, that they need to bring their own tea towels at this time, or provide that blue kind of kitchen roll stuff that they can use to wipe anything down with. Where refreshments are served from a hatch, such as a WI meeting or a coffee meeting, think about, you know, it might be that you want to work with those groups to have a kind of a pre-ordering system, so that you're avoiding queues at the hatch, so that you're avoiding a kind of a collection of people in one place. And obviously we want to keep people social distance as much as possible. So again, talk to the hirer about what their likely use of the kitchen is and how you can minimise the contact of people in those types of areas. What you don't want is, you know, 20 people bundling into the kitchen to make a coffee all at the same time. Okay. This slide is really just we were going to break for discussion, but I don't know if we need to at this stage, but we asked everybody before the session to provide us with some questions, and there were some really useful questions provided, and what we tried to do was incorporate all the questions that were asked ahead of these sessions within the presentation. So I hope we've successfully done that, and I just wanted this slide to really be an example of some of the questions that we were asked, and it was really very helpful from people to put those forward ahead of time. Okay, I'll hand over to
just had a question come in on the chat about whether these COVID secure guidelines cease to apply after step 4, if not when. At the moment we don't know. The guidance currently available suggests that at step 4, then yes, all these requirements will go. But I wouldn't bet my house on that. I also think that come the autumn, I think there'll probably be, you know, further waves of COVID, you know, and, you know, I suspect some of these things may be things we have to live with in the longer term. So wearing face coverings or social distancing may well come back at a later point, even if it is lifted during the summer as it was last summer. So thanks, John, for that. But I think at the moment we don't know is the absolute answer. I was just going to briefly touch on your hiring agreement, because that's your tool for ensuring that your hirers do the things you need them to do during this pandemic period. As you know, we always recommend that all halls use our model hire agreement, because that's a legal document that's been passed via the ACRE solicitor. So we're confident that it then provides a good contract between you and your hirers. But what we've done in addition to that is we've now produced some COVID-19 specific additional hiring conditions, and they set out what you as a committee expect your hirers to do. And again, that's a resource that we're going to circulate to you after this meeting. What I would ask you all to do is to obviously read those conditions through. There are some of them that might not apply to all of you, but modify it for your particular circumstance, and then for any hires that you take from when you would reopen, issue those hiring conditions to your hirers and get them to sign them and return them to you, because then contractually you've passed any obligations on you as a committee to the hirers that you want them to observe. So in terms of cleaning, or in terms of, you know, ensuring that they stick with the COVID secure capacity, things like that, you've passed that responsibility on to them. So that's quite an important point. I'm going to plough on and then we'll take some questions at the end. I've talked about these reopening resources that we're going to circulate to you. So as I say, you'll get a copy of this recording of this session to share with anybody else you wish to share it with. You'll get a copy of the slides. You're also going to get these things listed on this slide. So as you can see, there's an information sheet that hopefully gives a written summary of everything we've discussed, and then all these various appendices A through to M are all the sort of the templates and things that you might need to use, and you can pick and choose which ones you use, obviously. These other points at the end, somebody did just ask about the posters. Yeah, we've given copies of the posters, are all in the resources that we're going to send you, so that you can print those out and use them as you see fit. I also just wanted to briefly mention about the financial support that's available to community buildings. This first one that I'm talking about is a new grant that the government is making available from the 1st of April. The grant funding is being passed to local authorities, so to the district councils, to hand out. I'm afraid this first one, this Restart grant, is only available for businesses that pay rates, but the guidance is very clear that businesses in this term includes village halls and things like that. So if you're a rate paying village hall, you will be eligible for this one-off grant. What you get will depend on what your rateable value is, and you'll need to apply for that funding by the 30th of June. What I would say is, if you look on your own district council website, you'll find more information. So just go to the coronavirus information. You normally see something like business support grants. If you click on that, you'll see information on this Restart grant. Unfortunately, because it's done by the district councils, they all do it in different ways. East Cambridgeshire, you can go online now and confirm your eligibility for funding. Fenland District Council tell us that they are going to contact all their eligible businesses this week, and you'll receive the money next week. So they're really far ahead of the game on this occasion. South Cambs, Hunts and Peterborough are still just have a message on their website saying they'll be opening soon. So I just advise you just to keep an eye on that. If you don't pay rates, and unfortunately there are some village halls that obviously don't pay rates, if you go on to the next slide, Lisa, I just talk about the additional restrictions grant. And that's a grant that's available to businesses that aren't covered by other grant schemes. So if you aren't eligible for a Restart, please do talk to your district council about being eligible for an additional restrictions grant. We've had some village halls actually say to us they almost feel a bit guilty about the amount of funding they've received from government over the last 12 months. I think our message would be, please don't feel guilty at all. This is funding that you're eligible for. You are running a business really, in terms of hiring your hall out to communities, groups. You are providing a service. You are eligible for this funding. Please think carefully about how you use it. If you're worried about things like cleaning, this might be the time that you think, well, perhaps we could use some of that money to employ a professional cleaner. It might just take the burden off you and your hirers. It might be something you wish to think about. But the other things, you might want to put the money away for a rainy day. You might want to use it for building improvement project, it's entirely up to you. That money's, you know, you've earned it, that money is there for you.
Alison, I think there's a question from Sally.
Yeah, of course.
Hi, Alison. I appreciate you may not know this, but if anybody else has already, I'd heard about this Restart grant, just I'd forgotten about it, so thanks for the reminder. Do you think we found that because we applied last year, you know, the other grant that we were eligible for, and we've been drip fed different amounts, and actually we haven't had to do anything, it just appears in our bank account once which is amazing. Do you think here, or do you think this requires a separate registration? Does anyone
sorry, Sally, where are you from? You're from Barnet.
From Barnet Village.
Peterborough City Council, do you come under?
Yes, we do.
Yes, okay, so yeah, I mean, I would check their website. As I say, theirs was one of the ones that was still saying we haven't received the money from government yet, so we can't tell you how we're going to distribute it. I suspect they'll put a note on it, and they'll either say apply here, or it will say if you've received local restrictions, support grant funding, don't worry, we'll contact you. They seem to be handling it in different ways. Nothing's ever consistent.
No, that's fine. Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Anybody else need to ask any questions at this point? Lovely. That means we've either baffled you completely and you're just too overwhelmed to even think about asking questions, or we've done a perfect presentation. It's one thing or another, isn't it? Okay, there's just one more slide I'd like to show you before we finish, and that's just this one about our future training events. We've been lucky enough to receive some money from the Cambridgeshire Community Foundation from their COVID Recovery Fund. That's allowed us to obviously develop and deliver this training. We're also going to develop some more training around things like marketing your village hall, getting new people involved in the running of your village hall, and then also thinking about, you know, the types of activity your community is going to need. I think all communities have evolved quite considerably over the last 12 months. So we think there's some work we could do with sort of supporting new community members to come forward and think about different activities that could perhaps be run from village halls. So that's something to look out for. The other thing I'd ask you to look out for is our normal programme of coffee morning events, which Lisa runs. The feedback from the people who go to those is that they find them really, really useful. So what we're going to do is we're going to circulate a link to the programme for forthcoming events when we send around this information to you. And then obviously, if you're interested, please do book onto those. They're really informal. They're just sort of chatty events. Sometimes we sort of have a speaker or somebody giving a little bit of sort of training information in sort of bite-sized chunks, but really they're just an opportunity for you to chat to each other and to chat to Lisa. I'm just going to just check there's no more questions in the chat, because it looks like...
Happy for me to stop sharing now and bring everybody back together? Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. Confirm that church groups coming back to the hall, will they appear on the list of groups coming back that you are sending us? The church stuff, I think, does. In terms of, are you talking about sort of worship, or are you talking about sort of like church meetings, Claire? Claire? Yes, Claire.
Hello, am I back on? Can you hear me? Hi. It's just I've got regular church groups that come every month, every week of the year. I've had another inquiry about a church. I've never been so every church group in the world seems to want to use our hall, and it's the only all your points you've made today has been so. It's confirmed some of the things we have been doing, but the one thing that me and the committee was still concerned about was church groups. Okay. So if there's any class, so we just said to them after the 21st of June, but obviously if I can get them back any earlier.
No, you can. So church services obviously can take place now. They do need to follow the government guidance on places of worship. And what we'll do is we'll add when we do our Q&A, we'll add a link to that so you can access that directly. But yeah, church services can take place now. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. I can forward it to the committee. That's lovely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
No worries. Anybody else? Looks like all hands are down. I'm just going to